What's up everyone, it's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and in the aftermath of the announcement and the opening of pre-orders and all the other crazy stuff going on with the SNES Classic or the SNES Mini, wherever you live, they changed the name slightly, I wanted to talk about something different. Not completely different, but future in the same vein different. So, we all know last year, 2016, saw the NES Classic, the NES Mini, again, whatever you call it, and 2017 is going to see the SNES Classic and the SNES Mini. So, the big question is, in 2018, will we see an N64 Classic or an N64 Mini? Personally, I think we will, and I think it'll be great. I can't wait for it to see if they actually do it, because the N64, well, I mean, the N64, where do I start with the N64? It's got so many good games on it. Now, there's something I'm going to run into and stumble over the words I just said a second ago in a moment, but the point is, it's got huge games that many people remember, as well as being in around the first leap to 3D, because obviously you have the PlayStation 1 and the Nintendo 64, and they were the big first pushes into 3D gaming in the console space. So there's obviously some benefit to that as well. But some of the issues you run into straight away with the Nintendo 64 is that when you look at the game library of the Nintendo 64, yes, there was a lot of good games on there as well, but there was nowhere near as much of a wide spectrum of top quality titles like you had on the Super Nintendo. I mean, yes, like there's dozens of great games on the Nintendo 64, but when you look at all the different genres, all the different games, the different developers, the different publishers, and the first party titles on the Super Nintendo, you had a much wider variety and much wider selection and quality levels to choose from, and many more games that received much higher critical acclaim. So that is one thing that may run into a small issue. So I'm not going to go into the list. I'm not going to go into, like, you know, what 20 or 25 or 30 games or whatever we'll see on there. I will list out one or two real quick that I really hope to see on there. There'll be the obvious ones. We'll see Ocarina of Time. We'll see Majora's Mask. We'll see Super Mario 64. We'll see Mario Kart 64. There'll be questionable stuff like, will we possibly see GoldenEye, because we all know there's big issues with the GoldenEye license as it is at the moment. Will we see stuff like Banjo? Will we see stuff like Donkey Kong Country 60 or Donkey Kong 64? Will we see, you know, Perfect Dark? It remains to be seen, but the big thing is, I really hope, as an additional kind of thing just on there as well, I want to see one of the three following games. I want to see either WCW NWO Revenge, WrestleMania 2000, or WWF No Mercy. I want to see at least one of those games, preferably either WWF No Mercy or WCW NWO Revenge. There's a reason for... I know No Mercy was the biggest game in the series, in the sense that it had the most variety and the most content in it, and I lean a bit more towards WCW NWO Revenge because that was the first game in, I suppose you'd call it the trilogy, that I played, and that was my introduction to it for so many years. So I've got fond personal memories of that one, you know, my own attachment to it. There's a couple of other things to consider for it as well. Because of the controller, they obviously need to design a new controller. Not so much a new controller, I should say, but they need to shrink down their existing one. And because of the whole analog stick situation, it might cost a little bit more per controller if they start selling them separately. I mean, they're gonna have to, for the simple reason is, when you look at the N64, it's the first proper console with 4-player multiplayer in mind. Because yes, you could get a multi-tap for your Super Nintendo, you could get a multi-tap for the PlayStation 1, you could even get the Micro Machines cartridge on the Sega Mega Drive, which had 2 additional ports built into the cartridge just to get 4-player. But the fact is, the N64 had 4 controller ports built into it from the get-go. So I think they would probably include one possibly 2 controllers. There's no way they would include 3 or 4, because first off, the price would be astronomical as it is. They're probably going to charge even more for it, and the N64 unit in general. How many games we get on there will also be up for debate. There could be 20, there could be 21, there could be 25, there could be 30, there could be even less. There could be 15, 12 games maybe. I think anything lower than 15 might be pushing it. Hell, anything lower than 20 might seem borderline as it is. But with the big focus on party games and huge multiplayer games, and the wealth of multiplayer games on the actual system, they're going to have to sell those controllers separately. Will they be a little bit more expensive? Who knows? Maybe they'll put a massive production line because they know they're going to need a severe amount of controllers for it. So that's all pretty promising. It all goes back to the potential price, the potential games they include, the potential amount of controllers, especially because the controllers are going to have they would, if this whole console even does exist, they would include the ones with the Wii nunchuck controller port thingy, like the SNES Classic and the NES Classic have. So that's a new one. That's a new thing that would also come in handy for people who want to play Virtual Console and N64 games on their Wii, or even on their Wii U in Wii mode, you know? That's pretty handy, or hell, you could actually play them even in Wii U mode. So I think that's pretty cool. That would also offer another avenue for other people into that. That leads on to one other thing, or well, there's 2 other things I want to talk about really, and it would be in potentially even the future, maybe 2019, the year after the potential N64 mini happens. Will we have a GameCube mini? Because don't forget, flash memory is dirt cheap at this point. So obviously games on the GameCube would be bigger, and they could easily be stored on flash memory. You could get like 32 gig flash memory, stick on, you know, a dozen games, maybe 15 games, whatever, and go from there. The GameCube also has a great library. One we won't get into too much and too crazy here. And again, 4 native controller ports. So there's great games for single player, great games for multiplayer. It's a great party system. Again, what would the deal be on there? They'd have to work it in a way that I believe they already have. Well, see, they could even use GameCube controller ports on the actual ones, because even though I believe they have GameCube controllers with the Wii port on them, you could still use GameCube ones, because Nintendo actually made GameCube. They remade GameCube controllers with GameCube controller ports for Smash on the Wii U. So they could still just possibly reprint those, or reprint a variation of them. So that's pretty handy, and an easy potential market into, or well, removing a barrier from the potential market issues that they might have. And that leads me on to the final part that I want to talk about. Will we ever see a Game Boy Mini, a Game Boy Classic, a Game Boy Color Mini, a Game Boy Color Classic, a Game Boy Advance Mini, Game Boy Advance Classic, whatever it is, whatever way they're going to work it? For handheld, it's a little bit different, because one, it's going to be updated for modern handheld screens, modern LCDs, all that as well. But I still think they can do it in a really good way. What I mean by that is they could potentially, let's just use the Game Boy, let's just use the base Game Boy, not the Color, not the Advance, let's just use the base Game Boy as a model here. They could release a Game Boy, and it could be the same size. It wouldn't even need to be called a Game Boy Mini, just call it a Game Boy Classic. Just keep it the same size, because the Game Boy is a decent size as it was, at least the original Game Boy. Have a decent lithium-ion rechargeable battery just built in, so you don't need to worry about messing around with 4 AA's the whole time, and that'll be nice. So what is the potential around it? Well, first off, they could just block up the controller port, or not the controller port, the cartridge port, or hell, they could even leave it there. Just there'll obviously be no connector in it, just so that it looks cool and it looks the same and whatever. But here's the thing, the screen is what's important. So what I think, because of what they can do with modern screens and modern displays now, is you can get, or what they should do, is get a 3-color display. It's just a standard LCD like we use now, not like the old school dot matrix style ones back in the day. Use the available technology now, make it be able to display, actually, let's put it in with 4 colors. Make it be able to display 4 colors. Make it to be able to display green, black, grey, and actually that's it, green, black, and grey. I was going to say white as well, but green, black, and grey. Let's put white in there too, just for the sake of it. And that way, they can do it with depending on what model Game Boy you had back in the day. Because don't forget, some of them had the green with the black pixels, or some of them had the whitish grey with the black pixels. So you could possibly just have a switch to go between them, just a little button or a little option in the menu or whatever. Because we all know when you look at the NES Classic, it's got like the 4:3 filter, it's got the scan lines, it's got pixel perfect. That could be another option in the Game Boy Mini or the Game Boy Classic, because it wouldn't be a Game Boy Mini. So that's another option they could do in there. Or they could do it the same way with the Game Boy Color. If they were to do a Game Boy Color Classic, they could just do the same thing. They'd have a modern color LCD screen, and that would be it. It would just be perfect just in that way. The last bit that ties in the same breath, so I don't classify it as a different point, is they could also do something like Game Boy Family Classic or something like that. Just Game Boy Legacy or something along those lines. So they could use a standard style, standard modern-ish LCD color screen, and they could have Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games. That way it would all take advantage of the screen. It would all take advantage of the extra features that they could program into the ROM or into the emulators. So you could, if you're booting up a Game Boy game, you get the choice. You can have it set to boot to a gray and black or a green and black. And then, obviously, if you're playing a color game, you can play it in color. And then, if you're booting up a Game Boy Advance game, it will boot in the Game Boy Advance style. So that could potentially be a way around it as well. They might have to limit it to just the Game Boy and Game Boy Color in one, because the Game Boy Advance obviously had an L and R button, so it had shoulder buttons, more buttons to worry about. They might feel a little bit out of place, or they might not fit in a decent way on an original Game Boy style model. But it's pretty exciting that they're doing this kind of stuff. They've done the NES, they're doing the SNES. It's pretty exciting that they could potentially do an N64, GameCube, or even their handheld ones. If they do, I know I'll be picking them up. I'm curious to see how they'll do it, what features they'll add, what way they'll do it, and what games they'll put on it, because I know there's so many good Game Boy games, there's so many good Game Boy Color games, Game Boy Advance games, GameCube games, N64 games. So I'm really excited to see what the future holds in the next couple of years for the Nintendo retro scene. Tie all that in with a Virtual Console, we have a potential huge thing, because the Virtual Console is at home perfectly on the Switch if they just hurry up and announce it. So what do you think is the future of the mini Nintendo console? I know you can go the whole thing with get the original console, get a clone console, get a RetroPie, whatever. This is specifically about the actual Nintendo ones, the NES Classic, SNES Classic, and the potential of the rest of them that we covered in this video. What do you want to see? What do you think we'll see in it? What additions do you think will be added? What games would you want to see? Do you think concessions would need to be made in design choices, like say for the GameCube controllers or GameCube controller ports? What they could do with the handhelds? How would they work around that? How would you suggest it, or how would you like to see it done? That's a lot of stuff to cover, so let me know any of that stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the rest of the videos in my channel.